What up, gamers? Today we're going to discuss the new exotic trace rifle that's come to us in this season of arrivals, known as the Ruinous Effigy. And I have to hand it to the devs. This season, Bungie has provided us with some of the most creative exotics to date. The Witherhoard grenade launcher is basically a kinetic anarchy, except instead of arc affinity, it utilizes blight energy to cause overall tick damage on the enemy, consuming itself within, if you will. But we'll showcase more on that in a later video. Today we're looking into the exotic trace rifles of Destiny 2 and how they compare to one another. Starting with the Ruinous Effigy that is by far the most unique of all our trace rifle choices up to this point. And this is because essentially this trace rifle is two weapons in one. You can either utilize it like a normal trace rifle, beaming out its dark void energy upon your foes, or pick up one of the transmutation spears you create after taking out an enemy with your Ruinous Effigy thanks to its evolution trait. If you haven't utilized one of these transmutation spheres just yet, they basically work like a sword. You can light attack to melee your enemies, hold block to implement a guard and drain ability that allows you to take reduced damage while in its aura, but also drain enemies of their life that are within its radius that will heal its user. See, I wasn't joking when I said most creative exotics to date. And last, you have the heavy attack that throws the sphere straight into the ground, causing a massive AoE effect that basically takes out enemies nearby, including any majors unlucky enough to be within the area. The heavy attack also works well with taking out those pesky blights in one blow as well. Just something to keep in mind when clearing these out in the wasteland of the Prophecy Dungeon or anywhere else they might show up, such as contact events. If that wasn't enough, once you acquire the catalyst for this weapon, you also deal increased damage on a target damaged by one of your transmutation spheres. Basically, the catalyst grants a debuff to the Ruinous Effigy, which allows you to deal an additional 23% damage for 14 seconds on a target affected, just like any other debuff within Destiny 2. The kicker here is that this debuff is specific to the Ruinous Effigy itself, meaning that because debuffs and buffs can't be stacked on top of each other in Destiny 2, the Effigy's debuff is different. It applies specifically to the Effigy and doesn't debuff the target for any other weapon's use. So to maximize damage on a boss, you could create a transmutation sphere from another enemy and have someone hit the target to apply the Ruinous debuff, and then utilize an oppressive grenade or tether as well as the Warlock Well or Bubble Titan to maximize your damage output on, say, a raid boss. Not that the Ruinous is the most optimal way to damage a raid boss, but it can be done with maximum output of 2 debuffs and a buff applied on the target with this weapon. Oh, and I almost forgot, if you are wondering how to get the catalyst for those of you still working on the exotic quest for this trace rifle, just simply create a transmutation sphere with the Ruinous and then use a heavy attack with this sphere to take out an enemy and you will get the catalyst. Once you have it, you can either kill 5,000 enemies with the Ruinous Effigy, or just simply take out I think about 30 or 40 of Savathun's eyes with the Ruinous and the catalyst will be complete. If you need help with the eyes, I've got you covered. Just click on the card above or the location guide down in the link below in the description box. I've categorized all 50 eye locations across the solar system and even give you advice on how to grab the last of the eyes within the new dungeon. So be sure to check that out when you get to that step. Most of you though likely have the Ruinous already and have played with it plenty enough to know it's an awesome exotic. But what I wanted to know is how powerful is this trace rifle compared to the others within Destiny 2? Before the Ruinous Effigy came to us this season, we had 4 other exotic trace rifles in total. We had the very first of them all, the Coldheart, that was essentially a must-have within the Leviathan raid during year 1. The infamous Prometheus Lens that was completely busted, especially within Crucible when it first came out. I mean, it was literally insane. I honestly wish I had footage from back in the day, as it was literally everyone just running around, holding down the trigger and melting guardians with solar flares. Yeah. Good times, good times. Next we have the Wavesplitter, which sequences between 3 tiers of power beams as it fires. And then last we were granted the highly coveted Divinity exotic trace rifle that is still highly utilized in any Nightfall or raid boss run. So, what makes each of these unique? Let's start with the Coldheart. Coldheart's key perk is Longest Winter, which allows this trace rifle to dish out exponentially more damage the longer it remains on a target. Now back in year 1, this was a substantial increase, which is why it was a must-have within the Leviathan raid. But at some point, and I honestly don't know when, it was definitely nerfed from what it was previously capable of. But as it works now, the Longest Winter perk allows Coldheart to build up damage until it maxes out after 40 rounds have been dispensed. After that, you will continuously output 44% more damage than what it would do at its base. So still a very substantial perk damage-wise. Moving over to the next exotic trace rifle, we have the Prometheus Lens. Its key exotic perk is Prismatic Inferno, which basically increases the size of the damaging heat field it creates the longer you hold down the trigger. And this heat field is unique in that it actually adds AoE damage to the targets affected. For instance, on our boss Ogre here, we can see that it was critting at 571, but there's also an additional 212 being ticked onto the target due to this heat field. So in reality, we're doing 783 per round thanks to the the additional damage from the heat field. But this trace rifle was truly made for the mob enemies within Destiny 2, and this is because of its perk known as Flame Refraction. This perk states that kills with this weapon return a fraction of the ammo used to the magazine from reserves. So essentially, you'll never have to reload this trace rifle as long as you are getting kills with this weapon until you completely run out of reserves. Next we have the Wavesplitter with its oscillating power levels of 1, 2, and 3. And this oscillation has a recurring pattern as long as you hold the trigger down till empty. After testing, I found the pattern to be at level 2 for the first 7 rounds, the next 15 will be at level 1, followed by another 15 at level 3, the next 23 rounds will be at level 2, then the next 23 at level 1, shifting back up from the next 15 at level 2, and ending at the last 2 rounds at level 1. Since it's the same pattern every time, you could also keep the damage at level 2 for the entire mag as long as you keep burst firing the trigger. But as you can see in the damage graph, it only makes sense to do this if firing on the same target for a long period of time, as this won't make a substantial difference out of the first mag. Wavesplitter also comes with the perk Supercharged Battery, which allows you to fire at max power for a total of 5 seconds after collecting an orb of light, which also reloads the weapon from reserves if it's not already fully loaded, which will basically allow you to dish out a max damage for 80 rounds if fired immediately after picking up an orb of light. This is by far the most optimal way to utilize this weapon, but since the Wavesplitter doesn't have a catalyst, the only way to create orbs is with another masterworked weapon, your super, or from a teammate. So rare to utilize sometimes, but by far the most potent, as you can see from the damage over time shown in the graph. And the last of the trace rifles we have is the Divinity. Now, seemingly the weakest of all trace rifles as far as burst damage goes, Divinity is by far one of the most useful trace rifles in our collection to date. The Divinity does surprisingly well at sustained damage and plays a major part in supporting teammates in any in-game content such as raids or nightfalls. And this is because of its exotic perk known as Judgment, which states that sustained damage with this weapon will envelop its target in a field that weakens and disrupts them. And many of you have already seen this Judgment orb, which allows you to expand the crit spot on most enemies and also debuffs the target, allowing you to implement an additional 23% more damage onto the affected target. So after sustained fire of 10 rounds, you'll weaken the target and then continue to crit the target throughout the duration of the magazine. If that wasn't enough, Divinity also comes with the trait Penance, which allows for a burst of damage to trigger when a target remains under the effects of Judgment long enough. This will occur 4 times throughout the duration of the magazine as long as it's consistently held onto its target. So this perk will first occur after 60 rounds are fired from the mag, and then every 40 rounds thereafter till the mag is empty. Now that you know how each of these exotic trace rifles work, how do they compare damage-wise? When we look at the chart and normal damage, Coldheart is still the #1 damage dealer as long as you can maintain accuracy on your target to maximize your DPS. But if you have a supercharged Wavesplitter, you can keep up with the DPS of the Coldheart, but again you'll have some downtime and damage if no one is creating orbs of light for you to pick up. Even with those two at the top though, the new Ruinous Effigy will still out DPS both of those trace rifles with the catalyst equipped and the transmutation buff applied to the target. Divinity was actually a surprising one here given its low impact damage, but again due to its Penance perk and massive magazine, it's able to keep up with the other trace rifles in sustained DPS. Either way, Divinity is still top tier in my book given the support it provides in any activity regardless of its own damage output. But with the right perks applied and the catalyst equipped, the Ruinous Effigy will still dish out the most damage over any other exotic trace rifle currently in the game. And this is just utilizing its trace beam. If you want to implement even more damage, you could utilize the transmutation spears we spoke of earlier in the video. As you can see in the table, when draining an enemy, you will implement 182% more damage than its base crit damage of 910. If you melee, you dish out 700% more damage, and when you slam with your heavy attack, you can output over 4000% more damage than its normal trace beam damage on a target. Which honestly just makes this an overall fun weapon to have equipped because it can be utilized in so many different ways by you and your team. Like I said, this is definitely the season of creative exotics with one more to go on the list at the end of this summer. But all I can say is that I hope Bungie continues down this route as we move out of the season and into the new expansion Beyond Light come November, which already seems to be the case with this new tractor cannon style exotic being showcased this past week in the new Beyond Light Stasis trailer. But that's it for today, gamers. For those of you that have already acquired the Ruinous Effigy, let me know your thoughts on this exotic down below and what you would like to see out of Bungie come Beyond Light. And for those of you that haven't yet acquired this trace rifle, it's definitely not one to miss out on for this season. Thank you all for watching, and as usual, if you enjoyed the content, drop this video a like and tap fire subscribe for more on Destiny 2. But until next time, gamers, this is Sir Mab, signing off.